Hey, DawgNation, happy Tuesday. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, and we are going to jam a lot over the course of the next hour. I've probably got more questions for Jeff Sintel than I've had in a number of weeks, previous visits. This one's going to be loaded. We'll do our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with him just a bit later on. I'm going to begin with a blast from the past, something that is kind of for me in the fact that I think it's funny, and yet I do think it's also important for one aspect of something that I could see happening on Saturday. I'll try to explain that. There was kind of an interesting update from Georgia practice yesterday. We'll get into that too. So we have got a lot going on. What would you expect? Nothing different as a part of game week here. Dogs play on Saturday. We're talking about it as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So in a weird way, Vanderbilt finds itself in a position against Georgia on Saturday that Georgia was probably in when it traveled to Nashville to play Vanderbilt in 2017. And part of this, the reason why I'm starting the show with this today, is because admittedly, I just kind of think it's funny. You may or may not. You'll have to judge for yourself on that. But I am going to try to explain why I also think this might end up being relevant for something that's going to happen this Saturday as well. So are you with me thus far? Let's see if we can do this. Kirby Smart talked yesterday about the fact that one of the things that for now Georgia does not know about Vanderbilt is who its starting quarterback is going to be. And between the two guys that are currently battling it out, one of them is Riley Neal, a transfer from Ball State. The honest truth is I don't know the other guy's name, and I apologize for that. I guess if he plays well enough on Saturday, I'll know it forever. But for now, I don't even know who it is. But nonetheless, they're two guys battling it out for the Vanderbilt quarterback job. And Kirby Smart said yesterday they're preparing for both guys. They don't quite know how this is going to work out yesterday or how it's going to work out this Saturday. Here's what Kirby said on Monday.
I've been there before in the quarterback situation, so I know how it goes and being able to manage it. But we'll expect to be able to see both those guys, and if one of them plays the whole game, that probably means he's playing well. If we see both of them, they may be telling both of them they can play, but we've got to prepare for both, be ready to face both, and it's not going to be as much about those guys as the guys around them, because the guys around them are really good players, and they'll be as good as we face at those three positions this season.
So that's Kirby Smart. Now, I want you to notice something there. Now, we'll get to the whole thing about the Vanderbilt Big Three in a moment, the skill position players the Commodores have that are legitimately pretty good. We'll do more on that in a moment. But listen to Kirby when talking about what's going to go on with Vanderbilt at quarterback, kind of gives a calm, measured answer. Hey, we're prepared for both guys. I've been there before. I know what quarterback competitions are like. I've dealt with this, and we're going to kind of battle it out, prepare for both guys. And ultimately, this is an SEC opponent on the road, so whichever quarterback ends up playing, that's probably the right choice for Derek Mason. That's essentially what Kirby Smart says there, and that's kind of what you would expect. However, when the tables were turned back in 2017, and it was Georgia who, at least in Mason's mind, had an unsettled quarterback situation. Jake Fromm had emerged, but Jacob Eason was likely healthy enough to maybe come into play if he needed to. Mason, at the time, when it was Georgia whose quarterback situation at least appeared to be unsettled, he didn't have nearly as calm and nearly as measured a response. Part of the reason I'm playing this is because I think it's funny, but it's also, I think, somewhat instructive for this Saturday as well. Here is Derek Mason from back in 2017 when the shoe was on the other foot, and it was Georgia who was, at least in Mason's mind, trying to decide who its quarterback was going to be. Let's go back in time.
I believe, Fromm, is the guy. I believe Easton's an extremely talented quarterback, but that's up to Kirby who he decides to go with. He's not fooling me. If that's what we think we're doing here. That young man, Fromm's won ball games. He just came off a 48-0 win. We can quit with the coaching dramatics. When it's all said and done, they're 5-0. They're a good football team with lots of talent. They're playing extremely well. And, hats off to Kirby because he's done a great job.
Listen, for the life of me, I will never understand why Mason got so worked up back then about the idea of Fromm and Eason. They were essentially similar quarterbacks anyway, and Fromm was playing better than Eason at the time, or at least he was playing well enough that you wouldn't consider benching Fromm unless Fromm himself were to get hurt. There were really very little in the way of, quote, coaching dramatics out there, and I don't think that Kirby Smart was trying to do anything to fool Derek Mason at the time, nor do I think Mason's likely trying to fool Kirby Smart here, because ultimately that kind of stuff just doesn't really fool coaches very much, but it is interesting nonetheless that Mason's talk was so so big and so dramatic, and he got so worked up and involved on this, so much so that later on that same week, Kirby Smart was asked about what Mason had to say. Here was Kirby's response from back in 2017.
Again, Derek Mason's entitled to his opinion. Derek Mason's he's not at our practices. He doesn't watch our practice tape that I know of, so I'm not really concerned with those comments.
I mean, the last two programs in the world you would expect to have a war of words going on between the two coaches would be Georgia and Vanderbilt, but for at least a brief moment in 2017, that was kind of going down. That was kind of the case. Now, here's the reason why I think this is also relevant for this upcoming Saturday, regardless of who Vanderbilt ends up playing with its quarterback. Mason has shown you in the past that he's willing to kind of shoot from the hip just a little bit. He's willing to kind of go off the cuff just from a little bit. Boy, Georgia fans are already motivated to travel to Nashville. I think the Georgia team is motivated for the game simply because they're going to be so much red and black in the stands and because this team's chomping at the bit to go out there and battle another team after waging a war against itself in practice for the last few weeks. But wouldn't it be nice to add a little more spice to this thing? I mean, wouldn't it be nice to add a little more juice to this? And isn't Derek Mason, based on what he said in 2017, potentially the perfect coach to do that? The kind of guy who's, believe it or not, mouth has gotten ahead of him a couple times. Vanderbilt players much the same way. Remember that Vanderbilt guy that before the game against Alabama, was it 2 seasons ago? I guess it was 2017 as well, was talking about how, they were going to show Alabama what was up, and Bama ended up coming there and beating them 56-3 or whatever the final score ended up being. Wouldn't it be nice if Mason's mouth kind of got running a little bit this week too? Because he's potentially got a guy he could tout if he wanted to. Keyshawn Vaughn, the running back. I mean, they really got, it's been kind of called a big three of skill position talent with Khalija Lipscomb, the wide receiver, Jared Pinkney, the tight end. This is a pretty good level of skill position talent. Vaughn in particular is really a top flight running back. What if Mason in an interview this week or a press conference this week, what if he let it slip that he thinks the best running back on the field on Saturday plays for his team, or best running back in the SEC he thinks is his guy? I think that Georgia's already pretty motivated for this game, but wouldn't it make it a little more fun on Saturday if Mason, who was outspoken in kind of a weird way in 2017, would also be outspoken again on Saturday? I think that can make this game more fun. Now, on a more serious note, when it comes to the whole big three and, what's going to happen around the quarterback, whoever the starter for the Commodores ends up being, Kirby did talk about that a little bit yesterday too, and this is legit. No matter, what might happen for Georgia in terms of extra motivation for stopping Vaughn or, some of these other guys, Vanderbilt actually has some pretty good players in these skill position roles, Vaughn especially at the running back position. So whether it's extra motivation or just a strong game plan, you got to show up and ready to stop these guys, and Kirby Smart admitted that when he spoke to reporters yesterday too.
Well, you like a challenge. I mean, you certainly love and embrace a challenge. These guys are really talented. I mean, it just seems like they've each been superb players in our league. And you look at what they've been able to do offensively, it's pretty special to have 3 guys like that back. For 3 players that chose to not come out in the draft to come back, it gets your attention when you look up there and see Keyshawn Vaughn, same number of 10-plus runs that DeAndre Swift has. I mean, it's pretty special. It's eye-popping to catch your players. And we know how good Pinkney is from right down the road. I mean, he's a really talented player. So each one of those guys has done a lot to earn the respect of our players. Because when you do it in our league, it grabs the attention of the room.
There's a word that Kirby Smart used there twice that I think is really instructive for what's going to happen on Saturday. He used the word attention. It gets your attention when you see Keyshawn Vaughn stats. These guys performing against SEC competition as well as they have, that gets your attention, he said. I believe I would read into that if I were you. I believe I'm going to personally read into that and say, wow, this Georgia defense is ready to go out there and stop some guys they've been told are pretty good. And the only thing that might make watching that more fun is for Derek Mason, who's been drawing offsides and shot off his mouth before, for him to be asked a question about Vaughn this week. To say one more thing to maybe get this Georgia defense excited, that might make Nashville on Saturday night even more fun to watch. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video, 10 a.m., Dog Nation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And coming up today, boy, we're going to have a fun conversation, just a couple of minutes, with Jeff Sintel as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. There is a lot to get into. A big-time five-star prospect has listed Georgia among his finalists. We'll talk about that. A former UGA great has complimented in a big way a pretty impressive five-star target, at least, guy that's on the board here for the class of 2020. We'll do all of that and react to what might potentially be a new development in the Zachary Evans situation. So we'll do a lot of that with Jeff Sintel coming up here as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update in a couple of minutes here today on DawgNation Daily. Before we do that, though, let me look back at yesterday at Georgia practice. Now, I was not there. I was in the friendly confines of these DawgNation World Headquarters studios all day yesterday, but our buddy Connor Riley was there. Our buddy Mike Griffith was there, as he always is. And there was an interesting development that came out of Georgia practice that I thought was worth at least spending a minute or so here on DawgNation Daily here today. Media gets to watch kind of a brief window of time out there. They get to see a little bit of what goes on out there. And Mike noticed something with the Georgia secondary. If you're watching on video, I'll show these words to you. And if you're obviously listening radio podcast, I'll read it to you. Mike writes that junior college transfer cornerback DJ Daniel was taking first-team reps on Monday, working opposite Eric Stokes and ahead of sophomore Tyson Campbell. Once again, that's Mike Griffith. You can read his full practice report at DawgNation.com. But an interesting takeaway there, that Daniel, the junior college transfer, getting a chance to get some reps at what looked to be ahead of Tyson Campbell. This is interesting because Campbell did start some a year ago before being replaced by Eric Stokes, and was kind of thought, or maybe still is kind of thought, to be the odds-on leader, to be that starter opposite Eric Stokes for week one. At least that's the assumption we've been operating on here on DawgNation Daily. But maybe the presence of Daniel in that spot there yesterday, maybe that changes the calculus for this a little bit. Now, on the one hand, I am absolutely not diminishing my opinion of Tyson Campbell whatsoever. Around here, we kind of talk about the idea of buying stock or selling stock. I own a lot of stock in Tyson Campbell, and I am not selling that at all. I think that Campbell is still set up for a big season in a way that I may not necessarily think that about every player in this Georgia roster. In other words, I think that Campbell, because of his skill set, because of the fact that he played last year, that's a guy who intrigues me here for 2019. I also stood by him last year when, some folks were kind of coming at him after a couple of games, which he gave up big pass receptions, and I understand where the criticism comes from, but it hasn't changed my opinion on Campbell at all, and I remain steadfast that Campbell is a big part of this secondary. But with that said, we know this group is pretty deep. I even have a piece up at DawgNation.com right now, part of my Own the East series, courtesy of Georgia's own credit union. We talk about the overall level of depth in the Georgia secondary. We know this group is deep. We know Daniel in particular is an interesting prospect because Georgia doesn't typically go after junior college defensive backs. Would not go after a guy like Daniel unless it was sure that he had a chance to play. There were whispers and rumors coming out of the first scrimmage, for instance, when a lot of folks got a chance to see that Daniel performed well that day. So Daniel being in the mix is not a surprise. However, his emergence isn't necessarily going to cause me to turn my back on Campbell and what I still think is possible for him here in what will be his sophomore season. What it goes to show you overall is that this is a Georgia secondary that Smart himself is pretty confident in. Remember, he had all of these guys for spring practice. There are no summer enrollees in this group. There are no transfers that just arrived in this group. This entire bunch was either on the field for Georgia last year or previous years, or at least went through spring practice and is now pretty acclimated to the overall situation. Let me give you another example that proves my point on that. Let's go opposite of where Daniel was working yesterday to the other cornerback spot, the one we assume is going to be occupied by Eric Stokes. We would assume that Stokes is the one sure thing starter because that's the role in which he finished the season in last year. However, on Thursday, when Smart was admittedly a little salty with reporters all the way around, he wouldn't even concede the idea that Stokes is a surefire starter. Here's what he said then when asked about the cornerback's position opposite of the one that Daniel and Campbell may be battling it out for.
He's done a nice job developing him. He came in last year in a kind of a backup role, ended up winning the starting job by the way he played. He made some big plays in some big games, did a nice job. He's in competition right now. I mean, there's 3-4 guys out there at corner that are competing, and he knows it. He's got to step it up and play well every day because we're only judged based on our last play, and he's challenging for one of those starting positions.
So I think it's very interesting at the end there that Kirby Smart says even Eric Stokes is challenging for one of those starting positions. Now, I don't believe for a moment that Stokes isn't a starter in this team, to use a double negative there. I think he probably is, but the fact that Kirby won't even publicly concede that lets you know the nature of this competition right now going on at defensive back. I think Tyreek Stevenson is involved in this. I know he's been a little banged up a little bit this summer, but I think he's involved in this. I think the safety situation for Georgia actually looks really good right now with 2 very solid starters and a guy like Lewis Seen and potentially Otis Reese kind of in the mix below that. I believe the overall story for the Georgia secondary, whether it ends up being Tyson Campbell opposite Eric Stokes or ends up being DJ Daniel or someone like Tyreek Stevenson works his way in there, to say nothing of what might be happening with Devon Wilson and Mark Webb and some of those guys there at the star position. I think that the overall story for the Georgia secondary is the kind of thing that Georgia fans know, media within the Dog Nation bubble probably knows, but the national media hasn't quite figured out yet. That the Georgia secondary is a lot closer to being part of the solution for UGA than it is to be part of the problem. The assumption would be when you lose DeAndre Baker, a Thorpe Award winner from the previous year, that there'll be growing pains in trying to replace him. There may end up being some of those, but I think when you hear Kirby Smart talks, he likes the depth that he has. He likes the experience some of this group has gained, either through spring practice a year ago or being on the field the previous season. One way or another, no matter who the starters end up being, I think Kirby Smart feels pretty good about his secondary right now. All right, it is great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. A whole lot more fun stuff coming up on today's program, including some harsh words for Florida still continuing after its Week 0 ugly win versus Miami. Before that, a lot of recruiting news. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Let's talk to Jeff Sintel right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And Jeff Sintel, it has been a while since I've had as many questions for you as I have today. There's just a lot going on when it comes to the latest on the 2020 class. There's at least one 2021 question I want to squeeze in today, so we have got a lot of news to cover. If it's okay with you, I'd like to jump right into that. Darnell Washington, you wrote about this at DawgNation.com. He released his top 3. I think we can show this to folks. One of these really cool Vegas-themed edits for the Las Vegas native, Mr. Washington. It is Tennessee, it is Georgia, it is Miami. Jeff, I don't mind telling you that for a guy that at one point in time at a top 12 has now whittled it down to a top 3, if this is the competition for Georgia, I like the Dogs' chances. Now, I know Niedermeyer, the Tennessee tight end recruiter, is pretty effective at his position, but it seems like the Vols, to use a Vegas phrase, have kind of gone all in on Rick Gilbert for right now. Miami, I have zero respect for at the moment. I feel pretty good about where Georgia is for Darnell Washington. If this is indeed his top 3, how do you think a Georgia fan should feel about this?
Well, first of all, they should look at that Vegas edit and think of maybe happier times in one's lifetime. Maybe they should think about Miami or even Tennessee throwing snake eyes when it comes to this final 3 or top 3. It's funny, he went in on Instagram about 40 minutes ago, Brandon. I know you're all over Instagram, and he actually added back that that Alabama and Penn State are still in it. They're just not good enough to get at the table right now with Georgia, Miami, and Tennessee.
So, Jeff, who do I need to talk to? Congressman? Is this a state law thing? We got to get these young men to stop adding to their finalists. Zachary Evans has done this. Darnell Washington has done this. And far be it from me to try to anchor any of these guys I'd like to see come to Georgia. But it ought to be against the law to drop a top 3 and then go on Instagram the next day and say, no, I've still got 2 more that are included in this. I mean, I know when it comes to recruiting, there's sort of varied definitions of words. For instance, commitment doesn't mean what it used to mean. Offer doesn't mean what it used to mean. But can we at least protect the sanctity of a list of finalists? Is that asking too much?
Okay, Brad, I'm going to try to make you laugh here, sir. Are you saying that you don't like the fact that this was a soft top 3 with silent top 4s and top 5s to Penn State and Alabama, You don't like this director's cut of top 3, which includes extended scenes from Darnell Washington's recruitment?
Yeah, listen, I mean, the young man's free to do whatever he wants to do, but it just makes my job a lot harder because when Zachary Evans dropped his top 5, we came on the show and said, I'm not sure this is the real top 5. I'm pretty sure at least one of these Lone Star State schools is going to get included into that, and sure enough, that ended up being the case. And now Darnell Washington essentially does the same thing as well. I'm just saying that for those of us that love speculating about this kind of stuff, we don't want to water down the top 3 edit. I mean, there's room on that screen for 2 more logos if that's indeed what he wanted to do.
That's kind of funny, Brandon. I think with these young men and the moves they make, I mean, it's sometimes fun keeping up with them all. But when you have these expanded, I mean, you got to give the fella some credit. He went down from a top 12, and then he hinted that he has a top 4 coming, and then he goes to the top 3. He's at least making some progress in the room, right?
Well, and let me be. You're right about that, and you know how much fun I have with that kind of stuff typically. But I'll be serious about this from 2 standpoints, coming strictly from the perspective of a Georgia fan. As I told you before, beating out Tennessee, even with Niedermeyer recruiting, I'm assuming that's his lead recruiter, even with that going on, that's not the kind of thing that Georgia can do. Miami, I think, is fairly easy to beat. But the presence of Penn State, Big Ten teams just typically use tight ends more. They've been heavily involved for Theo Johnson, for instance, as well. So that's a program that recruits tight ends. Alabama has had a history of tight ends here between Irv Smith last year. You want to go back to the 5-star they had before that showed out in the national championship game. They've had kind of a history of tight ends. So from a Georgia perspective here, the inclusion of Alabama and Penn State, if that's indeed the case, that does make it more difficult than if it's just Tennessee and if it's just Miami.
Well, you see a lot of Eric Gilbert threads through that right there, where you have Tennessee and Alabama get involved. I've always found it curious. I don't know if we've ever brought it up on your fine program, Brandon, that with all this talk about Tennessee recruiting Eric Gilbert to be a wide receiver, his primary recruiter and day-to-day daily recruiter is actually still the tight ends coach. I find that very amusing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting, and it just kind of goes to show you, I guess, how effective they view him as a recruiter. But since you bring that up, I want to go through that door for a moment because our buddy Terrence Edwards, who we both like and respect, had some interesting things to say about Eric Gilbert on Twitter recently, really throwing some compliments his way, which is a pretty good time. In fact, we may have that to show. Maybe if we do, we can show that. But it's a pretty good time for that to come out, given the fact that Gilbert looked good in his season opener for Marietta this past week to start his high school career. And it kind of leads me to say that I've kind of evolved on this Gilbert recruitment just a little bit. I am now to the point where I'd be fine with Georgia recruiting him as a wide receiver. I really would. He catches the ball enough for Marietta on a deep and talented team. I'm not telling you he's the same kind of receiver that George Pickens is or the same kind of receiver that Dominic Blaylock is. If Georgia wants to recruit Rick Gilbert as a receiver, I'm more than fine with it. Maybe they still don't win the recruitment and Gilbert ends up going somewhere else, which I'm sort of fine with as well because Georgia's in the mix for plenty of top-flight guys. But when it comes to the strategy that I would employ here, I actually wouldn't have a problem with Georgia recruiting him as a receiver now. I just think he's that impressive with the way he catches the football.
Would that be the most Georgia thing to do if they ended up with Darnell Washington and Theo Johnson at tight end and then also Darnell and then Eric Gilbert at wide receiver? Would that just be your Mr. Burns heart delight right there?
Yeah, it'd be like what is the modern version of the old Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse from Notre Dame at running backs. I don't know what the trio of tight ends version of that would be, but that'd be a little bit like that, I guess.
Can you imagine a formation, and James Foley could definitely draw it up, with a package that includes maybe a Zamir White on one side of the formation, and then it would have on the other side of the formation a Gilbert, a Washington, and a Johnson all on the other side.
Yeah, that's
goodness gracious.
That's pretty impressive. Think about it. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider update here with Jeff Sintel. And, Marlowe's Tavern's a perfect place for a date night. You can kind of steal away in a comfy booth, kind of a relaxing, cool-looking dining room. It's one of the reasons why we like Marlowe's Tavern so much because it's just a great place to take the person you're trying to impress, whether it's a date or a client or anything else. You can have a little creme brulee. We've done that before. Jeff and I have actually made that. Now, if you go there for your own date night, you won't be eating creme brulee that I've made. You'll be eating creme brulee made by the chef right there at the tavern in your neighborhood, so no fears about that. But if you're looking for a great place to impress that significant other in your life, Marlowe's Tavern, the one closest to you, is certainly a great way to be able to do that. On the subject of guys who catch footballs, let me talk about Marcus Roseme for a moment, Jeff. I know you have seen what he was able to do over the weekend. Very impressive one-handed catch. Now, one-handed catches in football have become a little passé because everybody's making them all the time. But this one from Roseme as a high school player is still overall pretty impressive. And the question that leads me to want to ask you is, last year for the class of 2019 on this program, we fixated on receivers because it had been such a long time since Georgia landed an elite one. Well, last year it got two truly nationally elite, ranked among the best players in the country with Blaylock and George Pickens. And so in some respects, Georgia's now proven they can do what up till last year's in the recruiting cycle it hadn't necessarily shown. And here we are the year later, and Roseme is in the mix of the class of 2019. And for whatever reason, maybe I'm to blame for this, he just gets a lot less attention than receivers got for the 2019 class. So I'm curious to know from you, because you've watched him closely, you've told us before that you think he's knocking on the door of actually becoming a composite five-star before the recruiting cycle is all said and done. How well do you think Roseme compares to some of the receivers in this program that we have just seemingly obsessed over from time to time? He's got the ranking. He's got the film. What kind of player is Marcus Roseme in your mind?
I'm going to say this with not too much hesitation, but I think when Marcus Roseme, he came in real early, he's going to be a May guy in 2020. But I think when Marcus Roseme shows up at Georgia, I think he will immediately become one of the program's top 5 receivers. I think he is on the same talent spectrum as both Blaylock and Pickens were. And here's what's going to happen quite nicely for Georgia. When those viral clips start popping up during the season of a Matt Landers or a George Pickens or a Tyler Simmons or a Keiris Jackson or Demetrius Robertson, Dominique Blaylock start making these plays, then the program finally has cover boys for its wide receiver position as well. And what I mean by that is that big, athletic, 6'3" and up receiver that can go up and get a ball on anybody, and that will mesh very well with the pro-style thinking and the way Georgia goes about running its offense. I think what's interesting, if we want to be very objective when we start talking and sharing information about the wide receiver position at Georgia, Roseme is a guy, obviously, that's steadfastly committed to Georgia. But if you start talking that Eric Gilbert, I'm fine with it, goulash about the wide receiver position, then you got to start thinking about, okay, Georgia currently has a speed guy, Corey Wren, a size guy, and Roseme committed. There's also, I would say, the threat level now with Clemson for Arian Smith.
Yeah.
That's the nation's fastest wide receiver. There's lots of information for folks to find on the DawgNation forum about how first of all, how talented Smith is. He's probably the fastest football player in the country this year. Maybe even a polar bear's toenails, shout out to Outcast right there, difference in a 40-yard dash between him and Corey Wren. But then you've got, is Gilbert now wide receiver thought? What happens to Smith? I think Smith is the better pure burner at receiver, but at the same time, you've got Clemson knocking on his front door, too, saying, we'd love for you to come play for our program as well and slide down the slide and catch some balls from Trevor Lawrence.
It's a lot to think about for sure. A lot of folks in our YouTube comment section talking about Roseme. Jason Hester, Lamar Lovelace compares him to Michael Irvin, which is a very interesting comparison. And somebody else a moment ago talked about how he thinks he's absolutely just as good as Blaylock and Pickens were last year. So maybe it's about time to start giving Marcus Roseme a little more credit on this show. We probably don't talk about him as much as we should, just given the elite nature of his status as one of the top wide receivers for the class of 2020. But for now, Jeff, go ahead, sir.
So, Brandon, here's what I'm going to say. Dadgummit, this is a Dadgummit Marlowe's Tavern tell-all moment. We're going to have something on the site today about Marcus Roseme for people who learn a little bit more about him. It's time. It's time. He made SportsCenter Top 10. He made that big catch. We're going to put up a Marcus Roseme story today on DawgNation.com.
You know what, Jeff? That's perfect timing, and I'm glad you told the folks about that because that's going to be a really fun read coming up at DawgNation.com a little later on today. Let me change the subject for right now. And, Jeff, there is a town that I did not think I'd want to be talking about anytime too soon, but I'm going to mention it once again. It's Destrehan, Louisiana. That is the town that was not very kind to Georgia a year ago when John Emery Jr. decided he wanted to go to LSU instead of going to UGA, and probably we're still a little battle-scarred from losing that one around here. But Destrehan is interesting again for the class of 2020 because it is also the home of running back Kyle Edwards. Edwards just announced a public pledge within the last week to Alabama. I'm going to ask you a very self-serving question. Is Alabama taking another running back, Edwards, who is far more lowly rated than Evans or any of the other backs we typically discuss here? I have no idea if he's a good player or not. I'm just going by the ratings on this. He's not a highly rated player. Is this Alabama waving the white flag in the Zachary Evans chase? Now, caveat, of course, for the most part, we think this is Georgia versus Texas A&M at this point anyway, but maybe some Alabama fans don't necessarily feel that way. Is Alabama now officially eliminated from the Zachary Evans sweepstakes?
Yeah, man, it doesn't happen as simple as that Ed McMahon letter that comes to your mailbox, Brandon, about these sweepstakes entries. I would agree with one of your earlier points that to me it's always been a Georgia versus a Texas school for Zachary Evans. You continue to see things with Alabama's recruiting and also maybe a very slow talent bleed out of that program.
Oh, yeah.
Where if you're an Alabama fan, I mean, there's a great example. I'm going to bring up Landon Dickerson, somebody from 2016. Landon Dickerson was at Florida State. Georgia was in there for him for the longest time until Pittman's dream line of Notori Johnson, name from the past, and Justin Schaefer came together in that cycle. And there was just the thinking there that Dickerson hits Florida State. He has an okay first season, and then his second and third seasons are halted by injuries. And then he gets to Alabama. He decides to graduate out of Florida State. He can graduate transfer. He shows up at Alabama in June and is already a co-starter at center in one of the guard spots.
Yeah.
And then you hear rumbling. Now, to me, that should not happen at Alabama, especially mighty Alabama, especially across the offensive line. They still got Jedrick Willis there. They still got Alex Leatherwood, things of that nature.
Well, Jeff, how about Christian Harris, who just got on campus like 3 weeks ago, and because of McMillan's injury, he's going to start at linebacker.
Yeah, he's really fast. He played most of his career as a DB, cornerback, mostly cornerback. But Georgia was in his top three for the longest time last year as well.
Yeah.
But you see these things with Alabama, and then I just wanted to give that backstory because a lot of the things you hear from a lot of Alabama people, I still have a lot of contacts in that state, is how does Georgia still go over the top shelf, go get the top shelf running backs? And here's another player. Look at their top-rated offensive line recruit in the 2020 cycle right now. Here's another player where it seems like 2020 Alabama is settling for the type of recruiting meals that 2015, 16, and 17 Alabama wouldn't even look twice at.
So I want to stay on this topic for a couple seconds because I think it's interesting that you brought this up. I'd be lying if I said here on DawgNation Daily we haven't noticed this. There are seemingly more 3 stars in the mix for Alabama than we're used to seeing. Some of that is along the offensive line. The running back here, I believe, is a composite 3-star as well. Now, they're still highly rated with this current recruiting class, but they also have 22 public commitments. Their average level of recruit is rated below Georgia's right now for the 2020 class. Unless something's changed in the last few days, they still don't have a quarterback commit for 2020 either, and most of the quarterbacks of this class are kind of already off the board. I know they signed 2 last year, so maybe they don't feel like they need one, but still, Jeff, I do think this is very interesting that for now, Alabama is doing some things from a recruiting standpoint they historically would not have done. That's fair to say, right?
Yeah, but Alabama is recruiting like a top 5, top 7 program, and they're not recruiting like the program that won 7 consecutive number 1 mythical recruiting classes. And I think it's really easy to just translate this. Yeah, there's two trajectories each of these programs are going to. Where Georgia seems like it's trying to top its high score in Space Invaders every time with every recruiting cycle with Kirby Smart. It seems like Alabama is not able to throw those haymakers on the recruiting trail like it used to.
Well, I've said this a million times. The first year that Saban doesn't make the playoff, he's gone. Jeff, right now, he's not recruiting like a guy that plans on being in Alabama for 5 years. That's me. That's not you. People can send their hate mail to me on that. I'm just telling you. that right now Alabama seems to be, to me, operating on a very short-term trajectory. That doesn't mean they won't win the national championship this year, because that's what they're obviously stacking up and trying to do. But this is not a 5-year plan in place at Alabama at the moment. People can just sort of file that away and see if I end up being right about that. Let me do two things before we let you go, Jeff. I'm going to try to do these quick. They're both quarterback related. It was probably, and you can tell me if I'm overstating this, but probably not a great summer for Carson Beck. Some of the camp stuff maybe didn't go quite the way that he wanted it to, and yet it seems like, by all indications, I didn't get to see any of the game. I know it was streamed over the internet, that Beck had a really good performance to open his season for his team down in Florida on Friday night, essentially picking up where he had left off last year when it comes to 11-on-11 play. That's really been where he's made a name for himself. If you're watching on video, in fact, you can see one of the highlights from Beck getting it done with a very, very impressive throw there. How much does Beck, Jeff, for his recruiting reputation, whatever that matters, how much does he need a big senior season? How much, for Georgia fans who worry about who their starting quarterback is going to be in 2020, how much do they need to see Beck do more of what he did this past weekend, which was, at least to my eyes, play very well?
So what you want to see is you want to see Carson Beck do more with his senior season, right, sir?
Yeah, there you go. You should coin that phrase. That's pretty good. You should coin that.
Well, I would say that pressure doesn't seem like a privilege for Carson Beck during his senior year. What he's doing is he's trying to attack the day every day with a different roster at Derek Mann.
You're going to check off every box here. I like that.
I'm going to go back to energy vampires in a minute, man, if you give me a second.
That's not bad.
But so here's the thing. Carson Beck, actually, to provide clarity on this, opening wasn't what he thought it would be. He went to the quarterback collective and had a very good showing there. There were some pro coaches that took a lot of notice of what he did during those workouts, and they all kind of look at him, those Sunday coaches, those offensive coordinators, those quarterback coaches. They look at him as a guy that will be on their draft boards in a few years. Beck doesn't have the receivers, at least not right now, that he had a year ago. He had a lot of fast, quick, twitchy guys that had a little bit of low-level D1 potential. This year's receiving core is a little bit more of a work in progress. The line is probably just as good. The running back core, the running game will be a lot better. But this will be a lot more on maybe Carson Beck, much like Jake Fromm's going through, at least having to throw to a lot of unproven guys to begin the year. Well, you saw that game. You saw the way he performed. He actually, Brandon, showed a lot of mobility for folks that watched all that thing like I did. He got loose and was able to extend plays. There was one play on a short yardage play where the pocket collapsed. He saw a hole. He darted upfield, and he delivered the Madden-style truck stick to a defender and put a shoulder through the young man's helmet and gained a first down on a very contested play. There was no slide to that at all. So I think with Beck, I think the main thing that he's doing right now, even as a recruiter over the last 2 or 3 months on the trail, is everybody identifies him as an alpha quarterback and the type of quarterback that a guy like a Theo Johnson, a Darnell Washington, Zachary Evans, Kendall Milton, all those type of talents, Corey Wren, Marcus Roseney, all those guys can see themselves playing and doing big, big things with a Carson Beck at the helm.
That's really nice to hear. Let me do one quick final thing as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update before we let you go. Jeff, around here, we've kind of operated on the assumption that Caleb Williams was going to be, I guess, something of a given for Georgia's 2021 class, which may be, frankly, just too ambitious of a thought process right now. I did notice that there was a Yahoo story the other day where, and I didn't quite understand this, to be completely honest with you, but it read as if Williams' two favored schools were Stanford and Maryland. Maryland, obviously, a little bit of a geographic advantage. Stanford's the academic institution, which has done quarterbacking pretty well now for a number of years. Did you see the story? What do you make of this? From reading this, it seemed like there are other schools ahead of Georgia for Williams' commitment. Is this Georgia fans just being too presumptuous, I guess is the right word, about Williams? Did the Yahoo story get it wrong? What is this?
Okay, Brandon. Well, I saw the story, read the story, spoke to Caleb Williams about it, and shared a little bit more intel drips about that on the DawgNation forum.
Nice.
Intel hurry up thread.
Nice.
So here's a few things. What I guess the clarity we'll provide or context we'll provide to that story is there is a spreadsheet that is maintained by Caleb Williams' father. That's Carl Williams. And what they're doing is they're basically looking at, they're rating things. They got the analytics out there, and they're rating each of the schools that he's liked or he prefers or favors right now across a spectrum of criteria. One of the things the Williams family has asked these schools to do is to present a plan for him. That's in the article, to present a plan for him to how you would get him from your program from signing day to being a number one pick, and I think it's the 2024 draft. I think that's important to that family. They want, just like they would want any school that you want to get a computer engineering degree in, they want to know how that school is going to get their son employed by the NFL as the number one pick. And they're asking all of the schools in mind here to submit their presentations and their PowerPoints or their methods for going about that. The reason why Stanford and Maryland were cited as top schools is that they had the top-rated schools on that criteria. I don't know how feelings and guts and just, the it factor will carry over into their spreadsheet. I do know from talking to Caleb Williams that the concept of a top school or leaders, that's not something he's really throwing around right now or really has a good grasp on. He's a guy that doesn't feel like he needs to commit until after his junior season, and he doesn't care where everybody else is going. He doesn't care who is there. What he feels like is wherever he goes, his talents will rise to the ability he needs to in order to grab some playing time. It is and one of the other points in that forum thread, Brandon, that I wanted to make clear for folks is he visited Oregon, Stanford, LSU, and Georgia over the summer. He's not visiting schools over the summer unless he's deeply interested in them. Of course, Maryland's an easier haul. What I did find very interesting about through my reporting here is when he went to visit Stanford has yet to offer him. They want to see some more junior film. And when he was at Stanford, Coach David Shaw was not able to meet with him. Well, contrast that with the trip to Oregon. You better believe Cristobal met with him. The trip to LSU, Orgeron met with him, made lots of time. When he goes to Georgia, James Coley and Kirby Smart make those visits a priority. So that's just something to file away and think about, how one of the schools that's kind of contending right now is his top school, he doesn't even have an offer from, according to that article, as a top school. The other thing, folks that will remember this from the days of those energy vampires on the bus and Demetrius Robertson, and then the stories later on with Nakobe Dean. Everybody knows if they follow their DawgNation.com recruiting coverage that you got to have a 25 on your ACT, and you've got to be accepted into the school at Stanford in order to even get an offer to take an official visit after that school.
Well, Jeff, it's great stuff. It's been a while since we've done one of these real long ones as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update, but we appreciate your time today. And while I've got folks' attention, I'll also remind you that speaking of Marlowe's, we've got brand new content courtesy of Marlowe's debuting this week. Take a look on Thursday for our Marlowe's matchup. Myself and the great former Georgia All-American John Stinchcomb looking ahead to the upcoming game for the Dogs each week. Obviously this week, a lot on Vanderbilt and all the folks heading up to Nashville to make it fun this weekend. Jeff, I'm looking forward to being in Nashville with you this weekend as well. And at some point, we got to talk about what we're doing. I told folks as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down yesterday that I'm trying to get you to do like a little bit of a pub crawl, kind of a fun caravan of a few of the hot spots around Broadway, Midtown, places like that around Nashville. And I can't quite tell if I've got your full buy-in on this or not yet. Connor's going to be with us, of course, too. I can't quite tell what kind of buy-in I'm getting from you on this.
Brandon, we just need to let the people decide. If there's some spots we need to go, we need to tweet up. We need to hang out. We need to. What's the opposite of a cool down in the middle of Nashville on a Friday night?
We're gonna get some Nashville weekend. Hot chicken and heat it up. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get some hot chicken and heat it up.
That sounds like a fun time.
Have you had the Nashville? Have you had the Nashville hot chicken before, Jeff?
I have not, Brandon. Is that a delicacy you've got to do?
I think it's probably pretty much one you're going to want to check out, I think.
Hey, folks, we're going to be in Nashville Friday night. You know, Brandon is going to be the maestro of ceremony. Connor will have all the beautiful, just out of college age women trailing him around because he's so DawgNation Daily famous right now. and we'd love to hang out with you guys sometime.
All right, we'll talk about this on Friday, Jeff. If you're good enough to join us again on DawgNation Daily, we need an official, definitive plan. We're going to do some huge events later on this season. This one's a little bit more on the kind of the low-key down low, but I think it's going to be really, really fun. So can we talk more about this on Friday?
We're going to talk about hot chicken intel on Friday.
There you go. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So, yeah, we're going to talk more about this. This is like twice now that I've pitched him the idea of doing this, and he's kind of sidestepped it both times. He's tried to do a DeAndre Swift move on me a couple times here. I don't know what he has planned. He must have something he wants to do privately or something. So, by all means, but I think we're going to do. I think we're going to do this kind of a low key thing, a little bit more relaxed atmosphere. I think this is going to be fun. But I got to get Jeff's buy-in on this. I believe I've got Connor Riley ready to go, but I just got to get everybody else involved as well. Hey, let me tell you about my friends at MyBookie. Some of the stuff they're doing for this upcoming football season. This is going to be, I think, the most fun year for MyBookie because they're doing something. I believe this is the first time they've done this. I've always wanted to do this. How about an online handicapping super contest? Now, you've heard of these super contests before where you pick some games. Well, here's what you do for the MyBookie one. The winner is going to win up to $100,000. It only costs $100 to enter. You just pick 5 NFL games against the spread, and then you climb the leaderboard. It's the way the super contest kind of works here. And then when it's all said and done, you're going to have your share of that prize pool depending on how well you do on the event. Also, the same thing that MyBookie's doing this season that they've always done, those big bonus when you sign up to $1,000 first deposit bonus through MyBookie. You can double your first deposit, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. It's D-A-W, the way it's supposed to be spelled, DawgNation, all one word. Use that promo code at MyBookie. MyBookie's very easy to find online. Just go to your browser, type it in, MyBookie. Search MyBookie, find MyBookie, use the promo code DawgNation. Big bonus when you sign up to $1,000 on your first deposit. You can double your first deposit. Check out MyBookie and make sure you use the promo code DawgNation when you do. All right, SEC through time here. Let's talk about a couple of stories. I saw where Greg McElroy goes on College Football Live yesterday, and he said that Felipe Franks had regressed. Now, I'm going to be very careful not to sound like a hypocrite when I talk about this, but I think that McElroy's getting this all wrong. This idea that we saw Franks play well last November, which proves he's good, and therefore we saw on Saturday was a regression from that. Honestly, this is the mistake that sports writers and analysts and people like that make all the time. The word consistency, is that the right word? Consistency is misused in sports constantly because people assume that consistency means maintaining your top-end performance every single Saturday, and that's not the case. Franks played a couple pretty good games late at the end of the season, and therefore people assumed he was going to be better. Mullen told us over the offseason he'd been working. But the truth is, he got a rare outlier at the end of last year where he may have played a good game, but for the most part, he has been consistent throughout his career. He is average as grits. And what we saw on Saturday from him to start the season against Miami was just kind of more of the same on that. So Franks actually isn't to blame here. He has told you what kind of quarterback he is. There is a wishful thinking among some in the media that the evidence might not be what it adds up to be. But in this case, what we saw from Franks on Saturday is just kind of more of the same there on that. Now, the part where I run the risk of being a little bit of a hypocrite is because, on the one hand, I'm going to tell you not to pay too much attention to some late November performances for Felipe Franks and the assumption that he's suddenly a much better player. But I am going to tell you that the late season performances for Joe Burrow a year ago are going to indicate a better year for him this upcoming season. Now, you may say, well, how in the world can both those things be true? There's a big difference between Burrow and Franks. We've been watching Franks for a long time. He's had the one thing at his disposal that most quarterbacks, if they are going to get better, they use to get better, and that's experience. Burrow, because he was buried in the Ohio State depth chart, didn't have as much of that. So the fact that Burrow found his way on the field for LSU and by the end of the season found his way to success, I'm sorry. If you're betting on one guy or the other, you are betting on Burrow at LSU to have the big year, not Franks at Florida. So this idea that McElroy says he regressed, the honest truth is this is who Felipe Franks has always been. There are a lot of quarterbacks I'd take over him in the SEC, Joe Burrow included. Speaking of LSU, former LSU defensive back Kelvin Joseph has apparently found a home. This is a big deal. I think it's Rivals that reported this first. If I got this wrong, then I apologize to to all concerned, I regret the error. It looks like he's going to Kentucky. Now, quiet as kept, Kentucky continues to add some talent here. Some of it's through recruiting. This is a big-time transfer. I think Florida thought they had Joseph, so for those of you that have been following the story, here's a reason for you to get involved. Gator haters out there, and I got to put Eddie on the set today. Eddie's missing off the desk for right now. But Gator haters will like this, the fact that Florida thought it was going to get the transfer from LSU. He's apparently going to Kentucky instead. That's a pretty big deal. There's a lot of talk. Kirk Herbstreit mentioned this the other day. This belief that Kentucky really did turn a corner last year, and that Stoops, the Kentucky coach, feels pretty good about his talent there. This thought that maybe this Kentucky program's building something a little more substantial than what exists with Will Muschamp at South Carolina, a little more quickly than what Jeremy Pruitt might be doing at Tennessee, and a little more stable than the weird situation involving Missouri, where it's a transfer quarterback and some NCAA sanctions and some things along those lines. I'm not necessarily buying into that right now. Kentucky's my pick to finish last in the SEC East, but there are some who are, and for the future, to be able to have a guy like Kelvin Joseph on your roster certainly seems to back that up, that Stoops may actually be building something in the SEC East. The bottom part of this conference, this division, can't necessarily be able to match right now. A couple other stories. I'm going to do these quickly. I talked about this with Jeff Sintel a moment ago. So Christian Harris, a freshman linebacker from Louisiana, comes into Alabama as a summer enrollee and is now on the depth chart that Saban released yesterday, listed as a starter. It was unheard of for a summer enrollee to be able to do this at Alabama within recent years. But because of the Josh McMillan injury and because of the fact that Harris himself is probably a pretty good player, all of a sudden this is indeed going down. The fact that Saban released a depth chart yesterday kind of got some attention because there are a lot of coaches now that don't do that. But on that depth chart, the presence of Harris as a starter is a pretty interesting development here for the Crimson Tide. They are not as deep at linebacker as you're used to seeing them be. Dylan Moses is still potentially a top-flight player, of course. But this is an interesting development to watch for on Saturday against Duke. By the way, Vegas loves Alabama here. This number's gone from 30 to 35 since the week has began. Two quick Tennessee stories. Tennessee has still not heard anything about the transfer status of Aubrey Solomon, who came to the Vols from Michigan. Obviously, I'm no Tennessee fan, and I don't really care if they get the depth on their roster or not, but I do at least think Solomon deserves to hear something from the NCAA. To me, there's something cruel and unusual about, ruling on some of these transfers very quickly and taking forever to rule on others. The Solomon news has been out here for months. It seems like the NCAA should have said something by now, but they obviously operate on their own time frame. And while this one may be hurting Tennessee, which we around here kind of like, the fact that they're, I think, treating Solomon unfairly is something I frankly don't like very much. And on a more serious subject, so Tennessee has announced that it's suspending Bryce Thompson, the defensive back who was involved with the domestic allegation and allegedly threatened to, I think, shoot up the school was the phrase that he used there. This is a potentially serious situation. He's suspended indefinitely. Obviously, the off-field stuff is serious, but within the realm of football, it's a pretty big loss for the Vols if he misses significant time. Tennessee's secondary, I've told you before, I think is pretty good. I think Thompson was one of the reasons why. So this is a story worth following. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, speaking of serious situations, on a sort of much different note, you may have seen the report. DawgNation.com had it yesterday. I guess The Athletic broke this first, that New England Patriots center and former Georgia Bulldog David Boss Andrews has been hospitalized dealing with a blood clot situation. He's going to miss an indefinite period of time there with the Patriots. This is the kind of thing that sort of goes beyond the realm of injury. This is health and illness, which is a completely different situation. And I don't have to say this. Everybody already knows this and believes this. Boy, you don't talk about prayers going out to Andrews right now. So scary and so disappointing for a guy that has represented Georgia so well since becoming a member of the Patriots. Around here, we don't like New England necessarily, but we love the way that Andrews represents in that uniform and some of the work that he's done. We had a chance to catch up with him back Super Bowl week, and he talked about the work that he did to go from being a guy that, lightly recruited guy, working his way up to Georgia, and now with the Patriots. And, his hard work is the kind of thing that's defined him as a player. In fact, here's what he said about that then.
I don't think it makes me any different football player. I've just been the same David I've been my whole life. Tried to play with the same way I played when I was 6 years old. I think the love for the game, the passion for the game, the love for your teammates, That stuff's what carries you and what makes you a good teammate and good football player.
You know, the phrase DGD is the kind of thing that gets thrown around a lot, and at times maybe it gets used too casually, too lightly. Y'all, there isn't anyone who embodies the whole notion of being a damn good dog more than David Boss Andrews does. Hard worker, made a name for himself, found a real home in the NFL, and now he's got a little bit of a health situation going on. We'll try to follow this story and stay close to what's happening up there in New England with him on that. His football career, for the moment, put on pause, a health situation that he's dealing with. Keep him in your prayers, and we'll hope to hear some good news on that front, hopefully very soon. So we appreciate you being with us here today on DawgNation Daily. Around this time on the show each and every day, we like to give you our Gator Hater Updater. We'll do that and let you know 1,032 days, that's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. We think that's really good news, and we're glad to be able to say that for you here today on DawgNation Daily. I mentioned this with Jeff Sintel also a little earlier. Y'all stay tuned this week for some really fun content coming up at DawgNation.com. A lot of stuff rolling out. One of the things I'm really excited about, we're going to do this for you this week. We're going to be doing our Marlowe's matchup with our buddy John Stinchcomb. And that means we'll be doing some Marlowe's broadcasts throughout the year here as well. We got our first one coming up in just a couple of weeks. We'll tell you more about that when we get there. It's going to be a great, fun season at DawgNation, in other words. Really new special content, some huge events coming up in the weeks ahead. I can't wait to tell all of you about it. Just really appreciate you being with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. Of course, R.S. Andrews plays all those positions for us here. Can do the same thing for you as well. So whether your AC might not be working, your water heater goes out, the last thing you want is to wake up in the morning, have turn on the water, take a shower, and all of a sudden no hot water's coming out. That's the kind of thing that doesn't make you feel good. And that special lady in your life, sometimes she doesn't like that too much either. So do what we do when we have any kind of issue like that. Go to rsandrews.com. Let Dari and the team kind of come over. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. There are no bad surprises with R.S. Andrews. They'll get your house back to working order in no time. So make sure you check them out online at rsandrews.com. All right, we'll do a lot of comments here today. Yesterday, I said we're going to try to get off at 11:15. We probably went to 11:20. Or maybe we may have even gone to 11:25, but we really are working our way towards getting off the air at 11:15 here today. So that's what we're going to try to do anyway. So we'll see if we can kind of keep that up and kind of keep that going as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down here today. Steve Banks says, what's my score prediction for the Vanderbilt game? I think I'm going somewhere in the neighborhood of 37-10, something along those lines. If I were forced to pick the point spread, which last I checked was Georgia minus the 21, I would take Georgia there. But the number I probably feel the best about is the under. I think it's at 57.5. In other words, I don't know how motivated Georgia is to just throw the ball all over the yard on Saturday. They may. It'd be more entertaining for us. We'd like to see that. I don't know how motivated they are to do that. I think Vanderbilt's going to be incredibly motivated to make Keyshawn Vaughn as much part of this game as it can. I don't think he finds the end zone much, but he might get enough carries to take time off the clock. I think the under's the real play here. So something in the ballpark of 34-10, 37-10. That's about what I'm going. Georgia to cover just slightly. The under to hit in a very big way. Robert Barnes says, I'm pulling for Auburn on Saturday, just like I did for the Gators. And I understand that. There's going to be some people who do like that SEC pride. I've said this before that, SEC pride was something I used to believe in. Back in the days of the BCS when, the SEC was trying to keep a streak of national championships alive, the idea that every SEC win mattered. I kind of bought into that back then, sort of for the same reason that some people want to keep taxes low. When you are rich, you want to take advantage of it. And, it was, as a Georgia fan, you look at all these SEC teams winning national championships, the brand that was built by the league at that time, when Georgia was finally good enough, they would be able to reap those same benefits. But because of a multitude of reasons, the fact that the SEC's brand by this point in time is well enough established, the fact this isn't quite as southeast of a league as it used to be, my notion of SEC pride, something that I used to truly believe in, speaking from the perspective as a fan, I don't quite believe in quite as much anymore. Now, I did hear from some of you on Friday when I said that. they said, listen, you shouldn't, discount the SEC for adding College Station. It's not all that much farther west than Fayetteville, Arkansas might be, and that's probably true as well. The truth is Arkansas also, Ozark Mountains, for instance, that kind of gets you out of the southeast footprint a little bit too, I guess. But for whatever reason, SEC pride was something I used to be very much involved with, and now from a fan's perspective, I don't see the practical value of rooting for the SEC in games like this anymore, nor do I have the emotional pull to be glad Auburn won. Now, I will tell you flat out, because of the SEC style in which Auburn plays, I think they dominate Oregon on Saturday. I think they win the game by 2 touchdowns. But it's not the kind of thing I feel the need to root for anymore. I don't. Connor Riley joins us after being in Athens yesterday.
No way Auburn wins that game by 2 touchdowns.
I think one of the untold stories for this season is the quality of the Auburn defense, the kind of thing that Oregon doesn't see a lot. I think the untold story of the year is how tough Auburn's defense is going to be. Tough on Georgia, tough on everybody it plays. What does that turn out to mean for Auburn from a record standpoint? Hard to say because Auburn legitimately plays a tough schedule. But that is a very, very very tough, legitimate Auburn defense, and I do truly believe that.
I would just bring up Oregon is the one team you can mention along with Georgia as having the best offensive line
That's
in
probably
the
true.
country.
That's probably
And
true.
That, I think, is a reason why Oregon has actually a better shot than Washington did a year ago in sort of beating Oregon, or in beating Auburn in sort of a Pac-12 opener, along with the fact that Auburn is going to be starting a true freshman quarterback in Bo Nix as well.
Miles Skedsvold says, how many carries do you think each running back gets? I've been saying for a while that I think that the distribution of the Georgia running backs this year is going to be a little more even among the three, and you may depress some stats because of that. Kirby even mentioned on Thursday about getting a 4th running back involved in that. I don't believe that you can give 4 running backs an even number of carries. I don't think that works out that well. That's too deep of a bench at that point in time. You see some NBA coaches tripped up by trying to keep too deep of a bench in games that really matter. I think playing 4 running backs evenly is too deep, too much of an attempt to reach into your depth from Georgia's standpoint. But on Saturday, do I see a fairly even distribution among Swift, assuming he's healthy, White, and Brian Harrion? I do, and my guess is that Cook's going to end up being the 4th guy there.
You're again sleeping on Cook.
Do you think Cook's one of the top 3 running backs for Georgia on Saturday?
No, I think it's going to go 13 carries for Brian Harrion, 11 for DeAndre Swift, 7 for Zamir White, and 6 for James Cook.
Yeah, that seems about right. I do think Harrion will be the leading rusher in terms of carries for Georgia on Saturday, and we'll see what the other guys do with the carries that they get. I think there's a role for Cook to be involved, but I don't think he cracks that top 3 over there. And I think that all the stats of the Georgia running backs this season could be somewhat suppressed by this. We've said before that we think the overall total number of rushing yards for Georgia this year will be pretty similar to what it's been in 2017, 2018. What Kirby said on Thursday, though, kind of, I think, only cements that for us a little bit more.
I will say, so Devin Gannon brings us up, and on a post-practice interview I did with Mike Griffith yesterday, I said, I don't know if DeAndre Swift can get to 1,000 yards this season.
Yeah.
He finished last season with 1,049, and he needed all 14 games to get to that threshold. And really, we both seem to agree that Georgia's going to split up its carries this year, both between Harrion, White, and for consistency's sake, I'll mention James Cook here, but really it's White and Cook.
But you got to at least factor Cook into the discussion because he is the number 3 back from all-purpose back from 2018.
Right, and I would just look at Alabama a season ago. They had 3 really good running backs in Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs, and Najee Harris. None of those guys finished with 1,000 yards, but they all finished between 900 and 650 yards. And I think there's a really good chance you see something similar this year with Georgia.
And in doing some of the research that I've done ahead of the start of the season, you end up looking at a lot of things involving other teams from time to time. I think one of the things that the average fan, now the person watching us right now is an above average fan, but the average fan probably doesn't realize is statistically speaking how good Alabama's rushing game was a year ago. Mm-hmm. We think of that being kind of a throw-happy team because of Tua Tagovailoa, and they did put up some really big passing stats, especially early on in the season. But the Alabama offensive line, to the extent that you can measure offensive line success, ranked as well as anybody did, and in a few categories actually even ahead of Georgia. the running game for Alabama, as much as the Tide had kind of become sort of a pass-first offense. They didn't sacrifice a whole lot when it comes to total running back production a year ago, even if no individual player stepped up and had all that big of a game. And I think that's the case for Georgia too. And here is the one kind of, maybe this matters, maybe it doesn't, practical argument for having Harrion heavily involved in the offense. I do think Kirby likes to be able to point to a Holyfield and a Harrion, guys who've waited their turn and then had success. I think that helps you with recruiting, and I think it helps you with guys' demeanor and morale on the current team to be able to say, I'm going to ask you to wait for your glory, but look what happens when you wait. Holyfield in 2018, the potential of what I believe Harrion could be in 2019, someone who I do think could be a 1,000-yard rusher, even though I'd probably bet on what Connor said, no one may be getting to 1,000 yards. But when you can point to these guys who really bided their time and eventually had success, I do think that helps your ability to kind of construct morale. And a lot of what Kirby does, I believe, with the substitution patterns and things like that, I do think he does a lot of those things with morale in mind, even though he would never admit doing that.
Right, and I think next year there's a really good chance we sort of see something similar with Zamir White, where he had to sort of have his time bided for different reasons than Holyfield and Harrion did. But I think going into next year, just about everybody is going to expect, if things go the way White are expected to go this year, I think there's a really good chance next year is the year he completely explodes and becomes one of the best running backs in all of college football.
So what happens if DeAndre Swift gets 4 carries on Saturday? Is this going to be one of those things where, at the game, Kirby's like, I don't know what you're talking about. We just tried to get everybody involved.
I think that's exactly what he says.
For the most part thus far, fans haven't really cared about this. Fans weren't up in arms last year when Smart's description of Swift didn't match what we were seeing with our own eyes. This has, for the most part, been kind of an inside media story. Are fans going to be on this? Let's say that Georgia does win the game the way I think they're going to, 34-10, 37-10, something like that. But if DeAndre Swift only gets 4 carries after Kirby Smart has, for the second year in a row, talked about how everything's fine with DeAndre, is the average fan going to be asking questions about that, or is the average fan just going to sort of be fine with whatever?
Does Georgia win by a lot? Is it a blowout?
Yeah, 34-10, 37-10. It's Georgia covers the spread, but Swift doesn't play much.
I don't think they're asking questions.
You may be right about that. I do think there is some motivation to get Zamir involved in this game because of how much of a popular player he is with coaches and teammates right now. And I think there'll be motivation to get Harrion involved just because of the reasons I explained before. So from that standpoint on Saturday, that leaves you a little less room for DeAndre Swift right there. Enrique Murillo asking about my shirt. So most of the stuff I have like this came from the UGA bookstore. I'm really thankful to have a great relationship with the UGA bookstore. Looking forward to being back with them 2 Saturdays from now as part of our Dog Nation postgame show. I'm really excited about that. And every time I'm in there, I always like to do a lot of shopping. And this is one of those really cool things that comes from the UGA bookstore from Nike. So thanks for noticing that. Will says, I just hope we stop Vaughn. And Will, I said this off the top of the program. I do think Georgia's going to have some motivation to do that. I'd love to see Mason shoot off his mouth. We've seen Vanderbilt do this before. I'd love to see somebody this week say that Vaughn's the best running back in the game. I think there's a chance that could happen, and I think that would make it even more fun for Georgia to go out there. But we've seen Georgia kind of create its own level of motivation in the past. I'm guessing there's probably a statistical number that Georgia has in mind for what they want to keep Keyshawn Vaughn below, and I'm guessing that for a Georgia team that hasn't had a chance to play another opponent in quite some time, I think they'll be pretty heavily motivated to do that. And does that keep him to 2 digits? I don't know. I think it's probably somewhere along the lines of 110, 115 yards, something like that. But if you can keep him below 4 yards a carry, that's what I think would be a really big deal for Georgia on Saturday. And under players, I think would be very happy if that does indeed take the place.
A season ago, Vaughn ran, I think, 9 carries for 79 yards. But I think the more interesting thing from that game was Kalijah Lipscomb and Jared Pinkney, who were statistically two of the best, statistically one of the best tight ends in the country in Pinkney, and the number 3 receiving leader in the conference last year. Those 2 guys combined for 3 catches for 28 yards with Kyle Shermer at quarterback, who, all things considered, was a pretty good quarterback for Vanderbilt. Now they're bringing in a guy who we really don't know a whole lot about. I expect Georgia to actually kind of say, hey, I know Lipscomb and Pickney are talented, but let's load the box and dare either Riley Neal or Deuce Wallace to try and beat us over the top.
Is that the other guy's name, Deuce Wallace?
Deuce Wallace, great name.
Give me 2 minutes on Deuce Wallace here.
He's a redshirt junior. He's from the state of Tennessee, and that's all I got for you.
Andrew Howell, this is on an off topic, but he says that he went to spend $7 at a gas station. His debit card got shut down for fraud alert. So the other day this happened to me too, and I promise I'll take 2 seconds on this. Talking about frustrating. It was the only card I happened to have in my wallet at the time. And you don't really think about needing multiple cards because I didn't do anything wrong. They shut the card down because of a fraud alert because for the 9 millionth time this bank got data breached. I didn't do anything wrong. It was their mistake. So I'm in the parking deck. I can't get out of the parking deck. They're not letting me out of this parking deck because I don't have proper funds to do this. And it's late at night. It's at least 7:38 p.m. So it's like no bank is open at the moment.
Yep.
I've got no way to get cash. I finally got somehow something wired to me and got enough money to get out of the parking deck and bought some gas to get home because my car was out of gas too. But for a while, I thought I was going to have to sleep in Athens because my bank just shut down my card. It wasn't my fault. I had plenty of money in the account. They just shut down the card.
Banks are a little overzealous. Switching gears here, was Dennis Wilson in the comment section yesterday?
Heavens no, I haven't seen him yet.
What a coward. He talks all this junk all off season about 2nd and 26, 4th and 11, and his team comes out and just decides not to block and hold on to the ball too long and blow a game against Florida that they had a real chance of winning. I think if Mark Richt is coaching that game, I think Miami might have won that. And, for Dennis Wilson to just no-show is just, and not sit here and
pretty
take his
disappointing.
medicine.
Pretty disappointing. Yeah, pretty disappointing. Green Soldier loves to see you calling him out. Yeah, that's I like to see that there as well. I like to see that too. Let me go back over to Facebook for a second. Yesterday we did something kind of fun where we kind of rapid fired our way through a couple of these. Let's see if we can try to do a good number of these before we get out. Philip Jordan Wells says a gentleman's blowout on Saturday. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Neil Adams says 6 sacks and 3 picks. I don't know about the 3 picks, but could you see Georgia getting 6 sacks on Saturday?
I'll take the under on both those.
It'd be nice to see 6 sacks.
Yeah, I would.
You really only need about 3 or 4 to be on pace for a really good season, but boy, 6 would be nice. Jimmy Guthrie says, I think Lewis Seen will have some great tackles. I do believe that Seen's going to be a big fan favorite this year.
Wide receiver breakdown. How many catches for the various guys? I will go Tyler Simmons leads the way with 6 catches, and I'll say 70 yards. I'm going to take this from Mike Griffith. I'm going to go 4 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown for Demetrius Robertson. I'm going to go 3 catches, 62 yards, and a touchdown for George Pickens. 4 catches, 39 yards for Charlie Warner. 3 catches, 19 yards for James Cook. And 1 catch apiece for Dominic Blaylock and Kearis Jackson.
Interesting. Drew Miller, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Let's get a couple more here. Dante Green said a running clock in the third would be nice. Didn't Georgia have a running clock in its season opener last year? Matthew McGahee says, I expect UJ to air it out on Saturday. Boy, I don't know if airing it out. He says stacking the box, Vanderbilt expecting the run. I think that Georgia's going to throw it some to kind of get into a little bit of a rhythm. I just don't know that Georgia wants to reward these young players too much too soon because I think it wants to keep them hungry. Mm-hmm. I think your big receivers on Saturday are, guys like Tyler Simmons. I've been touting for Lawrence Cager in comparison to Matt Landers for a little while here. Ultimately, I think that George Pickens is the big guy to emerge. But early in the season, I've been touting for Cager over Landers. It may be time for me to concede the fact that I may be wrong about that and that Landers, having been here for a while, maybe he's in line for some of the success in the early going. But I believe the receivers that Georgia throws to on Saturday are more likely to be guys who've been here because I think that Georgia wants to keep the Blaylocks and the Pickens and the guys like that hungry. Now, I expect D-Rob to get a lot of catches. I believe that D-Rob ends up being your leading receiver on Saturday. But for the other guys, I think it's more of a Simmons, maybe Landers instead of Cager, but it's a Landers, Simmons, D-Rob type of show in terms of the guys that get the most catches. The big breakout for George Pickens, I think, happens later in the year, in other words. Steve Bond says, I want to see him keep things kind of vanilla, not show our full hand. Yeah, I don't even know this so much from a play calling standpoint as just the guys there looking to showcase. I mean, James Coley's told us players, not plays. I think the players that Georgia looks to showcase on Saturday are the guys who've been here. But I kind of hope I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see, what, and because we're going to talk to Kirby tonight, and I'd like to ask him about Matt Landers and sort of what he's done, because I think coming into fall camp, we thought Cager might have been the guy to line up opposite Tyler Simmons. And for about the past week and a half or so, Landers has been that guy. And Landers is a guy who I think Georgia made a very concerned effort to get involved in the spring game to sort of see what he could do in an important game type atmosphere. And, he made some nice plays. He had a touchdown pass to DeJuan Mathis in that game. But I think there were still some questions about his hands and his overall catching ability, and I'll be interested to see how often he gets the ball on Saturday.
Willie Gray on Facebook had a really good question. He says, why do Georgia fans always have the narrative that the team is, quote, hiding someone? It was D-Rob a year ago. Maybe it's Pickens on Saturday. I think that's a really good question. I think for the most part that's due to wishful thinking, because while Georgia has had a good enough offense to dominate most of its opponents, it hasn't had a good enough offense to thrill and excite many UGA fans. So when it doesn't happen, I do think there's a wishful thinking aspect of, well, wait till they take the full reins off this offense. And for the most part, that just hasn't really happened. Georgia uses bunch formations. Georgia runs the ball a lot. Georgia has a conservative offense by design. This year, I do think there's a chance that's different. But, Connor, wouldn't you agree with me that Willie's point about hiding a player is due to fans kind of hoping one day it's just sort of more exciting than it looks like it's going to be?
Right, yeah. I think part of that is just, the over expectations on, especially with the recruiting rankings of guys like Zamir White, George Pickens, Blaylock, and I've certainly done my fair part of hyping those guys up. And, like Georgia, if for some reason Pickens, Blaylock, and White didn't play in that game, Georgia should still win anyway. And I think that's the argument to keeping it vanilla. You shouldn't, you shouldn't throw down. You shouldn't, if you're playing spades, you shouldn't try and win the first hand. You should try and set things up to where you can win the correct amount of hands, by playing it the best that you can.
Couple things here. Chime and then after this, we're going to get off the air, I promise, because we're 5 minutes after when I said. Chime and Dog says, who gets the most pancake blocks on Saturday? I don't have a prediction for that, but the one place where I'm not changing my tune, Ben Cleveland starts at right guard.
Interesting.
Cleveland starts at right guard. Put it on the board.
Interesting. I think I'm going to go Cade Mays.
Okay.
Under half a sack given up by the Georgia offensive line on Saturday.
It better be under. I mean, this group needs to go out and dominate. This group needs to go out and maul this Vanderbilt defensive front, and I believe they probably will. Kevin Blackman said, is something going on with Swift? I heard he was injured. So, Kevin, I'll take you back to the spring. Remember, we had Robert Edwards go on this show and talk about how the fact that Swift was dealing with an ankle back during spring practice, I don't believe that was ever reported anywhere, and it certainly wasn't volunteered by Kirby Smart. So, seemingly there's kind of always, or at least within the last couple of years, kind of something going on with Swift. Much of it doesn't quite get reported. And listen, Kirby doesn't, owe it to people to go around revealing the medical information for all of his players, and yet I don't know that anything's gained by all that secrecy either. So if I had to guess, I'm assuming that Swift right now is probably less than 100%, but I don't really know what it is, and I don't know how much it's going to impact how much he plays on Saturday or any in the month of September. Last year, he was seemingly limited in September, even though Kirby never acknowledged that. By the time November rolled around, you could make a case that Swift was one of the 5 best players in college football. By the time November came, he was dominating for Georgia in the games that really mattered. But if I had to say over-under of 99.5 in terms of a percent health for DeAndre Swift, I think it's less than 100% healthy right now.
Mm-hmm. And he's not the only guy, that'll be out there playing. Kirby's mentioned Jermaine Johnson as a guy who hasn't been 100%. I'm sure there are other guys we don't know. Kobe Dean's probably not going to be 100%. But he's still going to be out there and contributing on Saturday. So, football, it's a game where no one is ever really 100% healthy, and you just have to try and manage your own health the best way that you can.
So one of the things we're going to try to do here is because we do have to get off the air a little earlier. We can't go to 11:45 like we used to go to. But we're going to try to get in a lot of comments. So let us know how you feel like we're doing on the more rapid-fire version of the comments. I mean, I want to make sure I give a good answer, and Connor has time to give a good answer to the questions that get asked, but I want to make sure we ask plenty of questions. This is your time to interact. So we're going to try to do all of that. So you let us know how we're doing. Let us know how we're doing on that front. Connor, in the 1 minute that we have left, do you have a final thought to give after being at practice yesterday?
It's not Georgia related. It is Andrew, but it is football related. Andrew Luck retired over the weekend, and there were some people. He's 29 years old. He's walking away from the game of football. Enjoy the players while you get the chance to watch them. Andrew Luck is one of my more favorite guys that I've gotten to watch over the years, and following him from Stanford to the NFL. These guys are people too, and they get banged up. Luck has a long list of injuries, and I personally wish him nothing but the best and hope he finds the happiness that football can no longer bring him. And enjoy getting to watch these guys play football because, as Luck showed, we don't get to watch these guys play and star forever.
And from a Georgia standpoint, I think that's true. We are on a 3-year cycle for most of these guys. Either they sit as freshmen and then play for 3 years after that, or they play early and then they may be gone after their junior season. So the guys that we really get excited about and love and hope for the chance to see, we don't get them on campus for necessarily all that much time. So appreciating them while you have them is probably pretty good advice and a great way to close things out today. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Air, heating, plumbing, and electric. Of course, R.S. Andrews does all those things for us and can do all of that for you there as well. Well, why don't you think about getting that $99 Smiley tune-up for your air conditioning unit too? We got hot weather rolling back in here pretty soon. You want your house to be cooled down, they'll get you back to factory fresh specs. Use the website, rsandrews.com, to get in touch with them. And then make sure you check out the AJC for your Atlanta News Now. Check in throughout the day to find out things that are going on. Of course, Dragon Con is coming back up again. You can find out more about that. Mark Bradley, look at some of the cool stuff going on in the NFL here this season. And if you're ever in downtown Atlanta, the scooters are kind of a big issue. Well, there's this big sort of town hall type meeting that took place in Atlanta. There were hundreds and hundreds of people there. This is one of those things like when you walk around downtown Atlanta, there's just these like publicly available to be used scooters just strewn everywhere. So that's kind of a big issue. Some of this stuff has been serious. Some people have gotten hurt on these things. So you can check out ajc.com for a lot more on that too. Atlanta News Now, check in throughout the day at ajc.com to get a whole lot more on that. Y'all have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow for a DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to talking to you then.